Hi, I'm Christy Wellborn, and you're listening to Estes Park Radio.com. I'd like to welcome back John Meisner with the Estes Park Archives. Welcome back. It's nice to see you.
Thank you. Good to be back, Christy.
Interesting topic today, part one of newspapers.
Yeah, we're going to talk about newspapers first in Colorado and then work our way up to Estes Park's newspapers. Colorado had a newspaper even before it was a territory. It was Kansas Territory in 1859 when William Byers came out and had a printing press loaded up on a wagon from Omaha, Nebraska. And of course the gold rush was going on in the Denver area, and so he got a paper out called the Rocky Mountain News about 15 minutes before a competing paper. And the Rocky Mountain News lasted all of 150 years. That was Colorado. It wasn't even Colorado Territory yet, but it was Colorado's first paper. And then Larimer County, that became a county in 1861, its first paper was a Fort Collins paper called the Larimer County Express. And the Larimer County Express first volume, first issue, was saved and donated to the current Colorado State University in about 1923. And I came upon an article that said it had been donated, and said it had been donated to the museum at the Colorado Agricultural College. Colorado Agricultural College doesn't really have a museum anymore, so the place that I went looking for it was special collections at their library. They had since lost it, didn't know where it was. But in talking with various people at the Colorado State and with the Fort Collins Museum and with the newspaper there, we managed to track it down in a barn, in an old storage barn. And so the Larimer County Express, the Fort Collins Express, has been located and is saved, so people in Fort Collins that want to see. And there's even some Estes Park news in there too, from 1873. So it's nice that we've found that and that they'll take better care of it this time around. Loveland paper started in 1880. Loveland, of course, got a later start than Fort Collins as far as a community, and that paper was called the Loveland Leader, and the Loveland Leader has been digitized, and copies of it are safe, so we don't have to worry about Loveland's first paper. Again, Loveland's paper has Estes Park mentions in it because they're neighboring communities, so it's nice to go down and see that paper and be able to kind of touch it and feel it and say, oh yeah, this is a touchstone of our history as well. Berthoud also had a paper prior to the 20th century that was called the Berthoud Blade, and those issues have for the most part been lost, so it would be fun to locate some of those. But Berthoud is one of those communities that when Estes Park doesn't have a paper, it covers our news. So it's really wonderful to have some place that we had correspondents writing to every week and telling what was going on in Estes Park. Estes Park was late to the party, but the first paper that it had, and again it's late to the party because it's small, and in the wintertime it's really small, so it doesn't have enough population to support a newspaper. In the summertime there was other things going on, and the business people were interested in other things apparently besides publishing a newspaper and advertising all of the Estes Park things and businesses. So it wasn't until 1908 that a gentleman named J. Gordon Smith came from Loveland, and he was publishing a paper in Loveland called the Register. And there was, at the time, the papers were kind of, and this was the Wild West, there was a lot of gunfights and people not paying their bills and the editor carrying a gun with him at all times. So I think he left a bad situation and came up here to Estes Park for what he thought was a better one and maybe something that was lucrative, since Estes Park hadn't had a paper before he arrived. When he started this paper, it was called the Mountaineer. He claimed it was going to be a year-round paper, and he sold it for 5 cents an issue and $2 for a yearly subscription. It lasted all of about 13 issues before he left and went down to New Mexico. It's a good paper for Estes. It's not a tremendous paper, but because it's our first and because we located some of the first issues, which are actually donated to the Trail, the current Trail Gazette back in the 1930s, and now reside in the Estes Park Library, it gives people a chance to go through and look at Estes Park's first newspaper and some of its earliest recorded history. It was published in June, July, and August of 1908, and then there was a gap when Estes Park again didn't have a paper until 1912. That was a county commissioner and a Berthoud publisher named John Yale Munson, and he started a little booklet format, a little tabloid format newspaper called the Estes Park Trail, but it not to be confused with the Estes Park Trail that started in 1921. This was a summer paper. It came out once a week, and that paper came out on a Saturday, and it was filled with both contributed letters and contributed columns and column and page after page of hotel guests. Guests that were staying at the Stanley, guests that were staying at the Elkhorn Lodge, guests that were staying at the Crags, guests that were staying at the Lewiston after the Lewiston started in 1912 and then got big in 1915. I don't know why people were so fascinated with that back at that time. It was very hard to go through. It's very hard to wade through pages and pages of people's names and their hometowns, but it filled some purpose back then because it never stops. The Estes Park Trail is useful then in that the people who are studying genealogy, for example, might be interested, or people who knew that their parents or grandparents had come here on their honeymoon. It might be relevant to them. Where it's relevant to us now is they had series of columns. For example, in 1914, they profiled, the editor or one of the reporters went out and profiled every hotel and every lodge in Estes Park. And so that's some of the early history of some of our earliest that still survive, hotels and lodges, and then a lot of them that didn't. So it may be our only source of information for some of the lodges that didn't stick around very long. Then there's this huge gap in Estes Park's newspaper history. Part of it is because of the war. Part of it is just because, again, our small population and those papers may not have been financially successful. So it's not until 1920 that a gentleman comes from Longmont and publishes another weekly tabloid summer paper called the Trail Talk. It lasted only 10 issues. He said in advance he wasn't going to continue extended into the fall season, again with the columns and columns of people's names who are guests at the Elkhorn or at the Stanley. But the tragedy is that during that period, between 1914 and 1920, there's so much going on in Estes Park. The elk are coming from Montana because we eradicated all of our elk earlier, so we reintroduced them. National Park forms at Rocky Mountain National Park in 1915. The legislation passes in Congress, and so that starts in 1917. Estes Park is incorporated. So all of that early history of so many pivotal things are missing, except for one paper called the Estes Park Alakasai. And it's kind of an oddball paper. It's clearly published in 1914, although we don't have any issues of it. It may have been published in 1915 as well. There's one extant copy, one surviving copy of a 1915 Estes Park Alakasai in the Estes Park Museum, published in April. To me, it seems like a little trial copy or a little sample copy because they're talking about what's going to be published in the months ahead. But again, no evidence that anything was ever published there. In 1914, there is clear evidence that they were publishing an Estes Park Alakasai, because the other papers in the surrounding communities are saying, welcome to this new paper, we wish you the best. But we've never seen issues until a woman contacted me about 3 years ago and said, I hear you're looking for a paper called the Alakasai. And Alakasai is a Hopi Indian word that means so the story goes, or once upon a time. I don't know why the editor from Loveland chose that name. But once she said that, and once she said she had some, we went out there and we looked at them, and they do exist. She had 2 issues of what was probably about a 12 to 15 issue run in the summer of 1914. Great photographs, great articles, but we're at the point right now where she hasn't made a decision about what she wants to do with them. So it's kind of, we're in the waiting period where we don't know if she's going to eventually donate them to us or if we're going to eventually get the information. But it would be wonderful if Estes Park had access to that information.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, yes. In 1921, then, we have our first paper, real paper, that's a yearly, year-round, weekly paper called the Estes Park Trail. And so that's what we'll talk about when we pick this up next time.
Okay, well, very interesting beginnings here. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you again.
Okay.
John Meisner, Estes Park Archives. I'm Christy Welborn, and you're listening to EstesParkRadio.com.